Welcome to the Jack Westin MCAT Podcast with your hosts, Michael Maleka
and Molly Hudash. Welcome, everyone, to episode 1 of the Jack Westin MCAT Podcast with Mike and Molly. I'm Molly, the senior MCAT instructor here at Jack Westin. I'm so excited to be here with you guys, sharing all the advice that I wish that I knew when I sat for my exam. And I'm even more honored to be joined by Mike, our amazing co-host, and our brand new director of MCAT. Congratulations to you. As well as our special guest for today. We have Jack Westin himself joining us to talk about things that every MCAT student should know if they really want to succeed on the exam. So super excited to have you guys here. And while I was thinking about this, I think we have more than 20 years of MCAT experience between the three of us, which is pretty awesome.
Yeah, guys, thank you so much. I'm so excited for this. My name is Jack. I have been teaching for such a long time. It's crazy to think, but I don't even want to admit it at this point. But it's one of those things that I can't stop. I love teaching. I do it for the love of it. I feel like you guys do too. And I remember when I was sitting at Starbucks teaching my cousin's friend, like for free, just because I
Yeah.
love doing it. I didn't even, and so to be able to do this on a weekly basis, and touch as many lives as I can, and not just any lives. These are doctors. These are heroes of our community that will make a huge impact over the next decades to come, is in my opinion, like a treat. It's really an honor. So yeah, I'm so excited and grateful.
Yeah, I honestly think we've got some of the best students ever, right? Like I love teaching. I've been doing this for like over 4 years now. And like I've never met like a group of students that like have wanting to learn as much as like the students that we have the blessing to teach, right? Like again, like you said, Jack, like these are future doctors. They are so driven. And so I'm sure so many people are like listening to this who are like working super, super hard, who are like putting in the work, studying, working hard. And I just want to like shout out to all those people because we are just so, so blessed to teach all of them.
I
Yeah,
love that. Yeah.
yeah.
Oh, go ahead, Jack.
Yeah, it just makes it so much easier to work every
Mhm.
day, because you're working on behalf of people who really care
Mhm.
and really want this. And so, it's easy to show up and teach for 2 hours, 3 hours. I remember doing 5-hour marathon cars
Mhm.
sessions. And I'm like,
Yeah.
wow, okay, this was easy. Why was this easy? Because everyone wants to listen. Everyone want like they want that information, and so it's so easy to teach when you have that kind of mentality.
Yeah, I agree. And it's interesting because I mean, I've been teaching the MCAT now for 3 going on 4 years, but I've also over the past 6 taught elementary, middle, high school, college, like actually in college, and then also MCAT. So I've taught students as young as 4th grade and as old as, 40s and 50s, since anyone of any age really can take this next step, right, in their pre-med journey. And I totally agree. There's something magical about the MCAT space where you have all of these people that are so intelligent, so driven, but also just so uniquely motivated by this altruistic goal of becoming a physician. Like it's such a beautiful community to be part of, especially the one that you've built here at Jack Westin, Jack. It's something that I jump out of bed every morning to come and do. It's so amazing working with our students. It's like one of the joys of my life.
I have to say, like, the reason Jack Weston exists, and I know I have the name of the company, but really the reason why this company exists is because of incredible instructors such as yourselves. You guys, if you're listening to this podcast, I don't think there are two better people that could host this podcast. Between Mike and Molly, you could learn everything. You can like they will change your lives, and that's why we're doing this podcast. I really believe in Mike and Molly, and I really think that you're in for a lot of not just experience and knowledge, but motivation and also mentality and mindset and they're going to change your mood. Every time I speak to Mike, every time I speak to Molly, I feel better, and that's just their personality. So I'm excited. I can't wait to see what you guys do with this podcast and how you guys are going to make this like the best place, the best community to be a part of. And of course, we're going to be in those live sessions every week. Those free live sessions that you can also connect with us live. And that's the beauty of this is we don't just do the podcast. We don't just do the live sessions. We also build the course. And so you have this unique opportunity to connect with us, outside of this podcast if you really want to. And so I'm excited about this cool journey that we're about to embark in.
Yeah. I think the MCAT is like a really unique exam and a really unique scenario that I think I know I was when I was like thrown into it. Like I felt thrown into it because I felt like I was in undergrad and they were like, hey, you want to go to medicine? Here's this exam you have to take. And I felt like I knew how to do school at that point, right? I'd been doing school for like, probably 15 years at that point. But I'd never been in such an unstructured scenario where it's like I didn't have a professor. I didn't have a rubric. I didn't have, a lesson plan. There was an exam date and that was it. And I was like, what do I do? I just remember being that. And I'm sure you two are maybe the same, maybe not. I don't know.
No, definitely yes. And Jack, that was beautiful. Thank you for giving us your blessing, especially because, I'm here because personally, I know I've fallen for like every single pitfall that an MCAT student can fall for. Like Mike, when I first started this, I was the first to grab a stack of books that will remain nameless that everyone studying for the MCAT has purchased at some point in their career. Divided the number of weeks by the number of chapters, set out to read, 4 or 5 chapters a day, and felt overwhelmed and extremely lost. Then headed to our MCAT, picked up a study plan made by someone who got a 520, tried to just force that into my own life, which doesn't work, right? Ultimately, that's one of the reasons why I love to teach this is because you really have to get to know yourself and customize everything that you do for your exam for you. That's very hard, like you said, if you don't have a sort of direction or structure. But the beauty is you can be that for yourself. And that's kind of the ultimate goal of a podcast like this is to take the years of lessons that we've all learned, both in our own prep, as we were trying to navigate this journey on our own, but then also the things we've learned as we've guided, thousands of students through this process, right? We want to kind of boil down those years of experience to the real key strategies, tips and tricks for success, really like the insider info that's going to help you guys succeed, hopefully in as painless and enjoyable way as possible. But ultimately, right, this is a process that's going to help you grow so much, right? You're going to learn so much about yourself while studying for the MCAT. You'll grow as an individual, but also as a learner, right? The things that the study skills that you develop as you study for this exam are going to also help you just in medical school and as a human being, right? And a future physician. And ultimately, that's kind of going to bring us to the topic for today's episode, right? We're going to be talking about 5 things you absolutely need to know if you want to set up a solid plan for success on this exam, right? How do you get the most out of every single minute that you spend studying? Since I know many of you guys probably are wearing a lot of different hats. You might be parents, you might be in school, you might be working clinical jobs or internships or shadowing, right? I know personally I was juggling a lot. Mike, I imagine you were too when you were in this process.
Right. It's funny when we were like chatting about like what we wanted to talk about for today. I was just thinking like, wow, I made all of these mistakes. Like
Yep.
I did all these things and kind of learned it the hard way. And so that's why I'm really excited to talk about these things. So I'm like, learn from our mistakes today.
Yes.
I want you to take these things, and again, maybe you take these things and put it on the back burner, and then maybe you make the same mistake and be like, right, they told us, they warned me about that. And so that's why I'm really excited to talk about this stuff for today.
I felt called out when Molly was like, "Oh, I got all these books and I divided them all by chapters per day." And
Yep.
you create like this 3-4 month plan where okay, Monday I'm going to do these chapters, Tuesday I'm going to do these, and then within the first week you're like, wait a second, none of that worked. What am
Yep.
I going to do? I have to adapt, I have to change everything. So I'm excited.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's really the first thing that we want to talk about here today, right? Like the first need to know is how to begin your prep or to rekindle your prep if it's been a couple months and you're not feeling like you've been learning a ton, right? How to start with a solid plan. And Jack, you pointed out that some of us, right, in the past have created these long-term plans with every minute of every day planned out, right? You've got specific topics that you'll learn for the first time and review and when to do passages, like all mapped out from day one. But then inevitably life happens and you can't study for a week or you get COVID or, something major happens in your life. And then you're like, okay, well, now what? I have to throw it out and start again. Um, I think one of the most important things to do from the beginning is set up a plan that's flexible to you and intentionally made with you and your weak areas in mind. Um, Mike, I know you've been tutoring, gosh, probably hundreds of students at this point, right?
Yeah, I think we're like looking at the hours. I think it's like just in like the last year alone, I think I've done like over 1,000 hours
Oh
of
my
tutoring
goodness.
with students,
You
and
guys, you're in for a treat with Mike. That is amazing.
it's so I love it because when you work with so many students, you start seeing the same things in different students. Not to say that two students are ever the same, not by any means, but you start seeing the same little things. And one of those commonalities is the study schedule. A lot of people, and I do a lot of like the trial sessions. So if you ever want to just meet with a tutor, like just one-on-one, and it's totally free, I usually do a lot of those sessions where I just sit down and we can just chat. And so I look over like, hey, and like, what have you been studying so far? And I see the schedule that's been like, it's like to the T, but then edited. It's like, okay, I've pushed down this week
Yep.
3 times at this point. And one of the things I think is super important is being super realistic. I've had students
Yes.
like sit down with me and they're like, okay, like how many hours do you study a week? They're like, yeah, I usually plan for like 8 hours a day. And then when we talk about like how much work actually gets done, like they were like, yeah, I'll work 9 to 3 and then 8 hours right after that, right after work. But they're kind of just setting themselves up for failure at that point. Normally, and again, I know this because I did the same thing, right? Maybe 1, 2 hours of studying gets done, something catches our mind, or maybe we're tired, we're not in that mindset. And then before you know it, it's 10 o'clock. And now you're like, oh, I had all this planning I was going to do. And this gets us into this vicious cycle where it's like we start like, because we had these expectations that nobody can abide by, like it's really hard on us. And I know it is for a lot of students that I talk with.
Yeah. I feel like it comes into just like being a perfectionist. And I know I
Mhm.
speak for a lot of us going into medicine that, you are maybe type A, right? But also like you have this idealistic version or viewpoint of yourself of like, I could study all these things and understand it and perfectly retain it. And like, I can put together, a solid plan for X amount of months, or I know that I could sit down and study for 8 hours in a row. Like, we're very goal oriented, and we have very high expectations of ourselves. And I think it's important to acknowledge how much it stinks when we create this insane, lofty goal for ourselves that was never realistic. It was never attainable from the beginning. But because we said, this is what I'm going to do, it becomes an expectation. And then it's really tough when you can't do that. Even though it was never realistic, it feels like a failure, which then
Mhm.
creates this cycle of like, I can't succeed, right? Start small, work up. Don't create these insane, hyper, structured expectations for yourself. Um, it's it's defeating sometimes.
Mhm. Mhm. I think one thing that's also important is like, so if not the minute structure, should we just go no structure? And I think instead we have like I like thinking about like seasons of studying. Like you have like one MCAT study block, right? You're 3, 4 months on like some people, year, 2 years for others. We all sort of come in with different backgrounds but kind of structured out like, okay, this is the season of like, okay, this is my learning, my acquisition season. This is my practice at like season. This is when I'm learning or and like learning to apply my information. And then practice exam season, like that's kind of those blocks there, but also not treating them so rigidly, right? One of the things, right? I mean, what are your thoughts with that, Molly?
Yeah, I actually I get this question from students all the time. Basically like what should I be doing in these different phases? And I just want to clarify for anyone who might be listening, if you are doing a content phase or an acquisition phase, and then you're thinking, okay, I'll move into a practice phase and then I'll be, doing all my exams. It's a good way to structure, but you should be doing passages all throughout. You should
Mm-hmm.
be learning to apply while you're learning the content, right?
Mm-hmm.
You should be checking in with your performance on an exam or doing practice questions throughout this entire process. How to integrate practice materials and how to integrate exams compared to content is going to look different in these different phases. And I know that we do actually have a session that we hold every once in a while on how to study that we hit on that a lot. But this is a nice blended process where we
Mm-hmm.
need to be learning things for the first time in an active way, really truly engaging with the material and searching for understanding, then constantly practicing and making sure that we don't just know the material, but we know the material in the way that the AMC is going to test you on that material. I think we've all found out the hard way sometimes that those two things are not the same, right?
Mm-hmm.
We need to know it in an MCAT sense, and then we need to get just enough practice with a thorough review that we build this like second nature response when we see passages and questions like that. And I think that's true of all sections, but I think if anything, that is the most true with cars. And I know just saying the word cars is probably spiking a lot of sympathetic nervous systems out there, but cars is one of my favorite sections to talk about because ultimately it's all strategy. It's all
Mm-hmm.
strategy. It's all mindset, right? The tools that you bring to cars are the same for every passage, which can be terrifying and daunting if you don't have a toolkit, you don't have a strategy. But once you build it, these passages are rinse and repeat, right? They may be about different things on the surface, but you handle them the same way. And I think that that is beautiful training actually for the sciences. But Jack, I want to get your thoughts here on cars because you are like the cars king, unofficial, but deserved.
Yeah, I mean, I think cars is basically the test, right? I mean, like this test is all about reading passages and answering questions based on the passage. And that's not just exclusive to cars. Obviously, cars is 100% that, but the other sections have a lot of that too. And so I always tell students this test is 70% critical thinking, reasoning,
Mhm.
and 30% content. I still believe that even over the course of the past 15 years I've been teaching this, it's slowly been more and more reading based. And it's one of those things that I think you have to start early. It takes the longest to improve on it because you have to learn how to read and answer questions the MCAT way. And that's not going to happen if you cram 2 weeks before the test, right? And I have students who come to me saying, "Hey, Jack, can I like boost my score 3 4 points in cars? Like, can I go from like a 123 to a 127?" I say, yeah, but probably not in 2 weeks. It's unrealistic. And so if you start doing a passage a day, which is why we have our cars daily passages, that's really why we started it. If you do a passage a day from the very beginning, or even up to like 6 months, a year before you even start studying for the MCAT, you just did that. Your mindset is going to be totally different. You're going to read in a different way. You're going to answer questions in a different way. You're going to notice nuances that you wouldn't have otherwise noticed. And it's going to help you with all the sections, like I said.
Yeah, I mean, I was that guy. I was the guy that was like a 122, 123, like when I started out. And a little bit about myself, I'm Canadian. And so in Canada, for context, cars is the section, right? Like in the States, like a lot of the schools, look at the section pretty evenly, like depending on the school. But in Canada, it's like you just need to get above a 125 in all the sciences for most schools. Again, that's a generalization. But cars, it's like if you're not getting at least a 128, a 129 in cars, a lot of schools won't even look at your application. And so that was stressful for me. and maybe I'm talking to somebody who's listening in, where I was getting 122, 123, and my identity was like, can I just not read? Right? But that really wasn't the case. One thing that like brought it up to like a 131 on test day was it's not just about like being a good reader or being a fast reader even, but it's all about like your strategy. And that was like the real game changer. And something I love is like cars, once you have a solid strategy and you master it, cars is actually really fun, right? Because like this is the only section where you're being exposed to new things every single time. And as long as you have a game plan, like you're not just going in and winging it, you have a game plan, you know what to look for. Like you said, Jack, like there's like little things that show up in the passages that you know they're going to ask about, right? But if you have a plan to actually look for those things, man, these you can kind of start anticipating the questions. You can anticipate, oh, there's a big tone in this passage. They're probably going to ask about the tone in one of the questions. These are the sorts of things that like through strategy, like was really like a catalyst for boosting my score.
Yeah, I think you're hitting on something that's really important here of like a lot of us come in, especially with cars, because like we've established now, right? It's all strategy. But a lot of us come in with like this very strong tie between our performance and like our identity. Like, I'm not doing well in cars right now. That means I'm a bad reader, right? It's like, I think one of the most important things about the MCAT in general is stepping back and recognizing that your performance reflects your skill, or maybe the strategies you're using, and not your value or your amount of intelligence, right? Like just because you might not be succeeding in cars right now does not mean you're a bad reader. It doesn't mean you can't succeed in cars, right? We here at Jack Westin believe that everyone can succeed on cars, in sciences as well, of course, with the right help. But in cars, it's about your mindset. It's about these tools in your toolkit that you're bringing with you to succeed on this test. And it's also about your ability to sit in that kind of discomfort of, I'm not scoring where I want to be right now. Maybe I don't have many strategies that I'm really using, or maybe the strategies that I'm using are not serving me very well. And recognizing that doesn't mean that I'm not smart. That doesn't mean that I'm not worthy of being a doctor or that I'm not capable of being a doctor. It just means that I need to change my approach. And that is huge. I feel like that's true. I mean, it's true of every section. This is a critical thinking based test at the end of the day, right? Every section is critical thinking. But I think because cars has no content, students run up against that wall a lot earlier than in sciences. Since with the sciences, a lot of the times if we get something wrong, we're like, oh, I just didn't know that piece of material. I didn't know that content, right? The expectation is there's no content in cars. So when you get a question wrong, you're like, okay, well, it's just me. It's just the way that I read that. That's the only way that I could have gotten that correct, is if I read this differently. So I think getting in that mindset, that growth-oriented mindset, and also recognizing that just because you have a weakness doesn't mean you're not worthy, right? Doesn't mean that you're not capable. It just means that you've got some work to do. And unpacking those things, you can figure out the direction that you need to move in. It's one of the things that I love about teaching cars, is helping students kind of unpack that immediate desire to just say, I can't do it anymore. It's like, you can, and you will.
There are two things I want to just like quickly touch on. One is the pattern of this test. There is definitely a pattern to how they ask questions, what kind of passages they present, what they're looking for. And, you know, this is all I teach all day, is like how to look for that pattern, right? The second thing, and I get this question all the time. I've gotten this question from students every week since I started teaching. What's the number one thing I need to do to improve? And you may think it's practice. You may think it's, you know, something's like consistency, stamina, timing. It's none of that. It's literally your mindset. It's having a growth mindset, not having that fixed mindset of saying, oh, I can't do this because I'm ESL, or because I didn't read books when I grew up. No, it's literally telling yourself, this is where I'm at. I'm not doing well right now, but why? Right? Why am I not doing well? What can I do to get a little bit better tomorrow or next week? And if you set those at real, like we said a lot today, those realistic expectations of, hey, I'm at a 121, I'm at a 124, I'm at a 125. How do I get 1 point higher? You're going to actually start improving. It's like, and the improvement is compounding. You're gonna improve very quickly. Whereas if you think you're at a 130 or 129, you're studying like you're at a 130 or 129 when you're really not, that's when you're gonna start feeling that fixed mindset of I can't improve, I can't do well. And so, yeah, just like basically whatever you guys just said, I totally agree. And I think it's all about mindset.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, right? We need to start with an intention from the beginning, right? Again, that's first thing you need to know, right? Start with intention, start with the plan that works for you, integrate cars early, right? As kind of the second thing you need to know, but then also keep in mind the purpose of cars, right? Keep in mind the reason why cars is sometimes harder to improve in than others, right? It has to do with the strategy that you bring and the mindset that you have. But as Jack mentioned earlier, that mindset is not limited to cars, right? The difficulty of this exam as a whole is the whole thing is about critical thinking. The whole thing requires this growth-oriented mindset, right? It's not just cars. Although again, cars is the point at which a lot of us recognize this mindset as a roadblock, right? But it's in the sciences as well. And I'm always the first to out myself. When I took my exam back in 2021, I did very well. I got a 521 on my exam, very balanced score. I felt good when I took it, but I will be the first one to share that when I sat for it, I did not know 100% of the material, right? I got a 98th percentile score. I didn't know 98% of the material, right? Maybe I knew 80% at that point in my life, right? But the strategies that I showed up with helped immensely, right? That's really the difference between a good score and a great score is your mindset and your strategy. It's also not just test taking strategies, but content learning strategies, right? And application strategies. A ton of this is critical thinking, but you do need to make sure that you know your content as well. It's kind of a prerequisite for success, right? And that kind of brings us to our third thing we need to know, which is how to engage with content and master this content actively and efficiently so that it sticks over the course of the next couple months. So Michael, you were telling us about your students and your study plans that you help them make. I'd love to know from you, how do you coach students on how to learn actively so that they don't have to spend, 8 hours in a row trying to understand, let's say, electrostatics?
Right. Yeah, I love this idea, right? And it's something, yeah, Molly and I like when one of the first things we talked about when you and I like sat down was how we like our number one enemy again when students are studying is this need for memorization, right? Is
Yes.
this need to want to memorize everything. And so this is one of the things, like in not only like our free trial sessions, but in our course and also in one-on-one tutoring, that we sort of have to untrain like in a lot of students, because this idea of memorizing is something that is kind of ingrained to us from like our undergraduate studies and probably even before, where you could memorize the information in high school and university and you would do fine. You could get a 4.0 GPA just from
Mhm.
memorizing. But this exam, there's a reason the average score on this exam is a 500, 501, I guess nowadays. It's because a lot of us go into it with this idea, I'll just study it like I did in high school and I did in university. But that can't be the case. And what part of untraining that is like learning strategies to understand, because it might be so great to be like, okay, Mike, you say to understand, not to memorize. How do I actually do that? One of the biggest things, and I learned this when I started my like teaching journey in the MCAT, is teaching it yourself. Try
Mhm.
teaching the material to somebody else. I remember when I had like done very well on my own exam. I wrote in 2020 and scored like a 525, very even score across, a 132 in bio, 131 in chem phys. And one of the biggest things that I like once my friends found out, they were like, Mike, help me out. Like, help me
Mhm.
out. Help me, can you teach me? Right. And I remember when I started teaching, like, because that's how I actually got into it. Like, it's just teaching my friends. Like, I would try to teach some of the material, and I was like, okay, some of this I was like the material that I usually felt really good on, I could teach super easily. I kind of bring it down. I don't have to use all the big words. But it was always the material that I was never 100% on. And I never knew why. Like electrostatics, for example, I was pretty good with electrostatics, but I was always a little bit uncomfortable with it. And I wasn't sure why, because I would read the books over and over again. Like I knew the words, I knew the terms. But when I tried to teach it, I could feel like there was like this little bit of like, oh, that's what I don't know. Because I didn't
Mhm.
know how to explain it in a way that was simple. And I think that's one of the biggest things. If you want to, like, do I understand this? Try to teach somebody else. And as soon as you hit a roadblock or a slowdown, that's that you've just identified what you need to kind of dive in a little bit deeper on.
Yeah. I'm totally the same way. And especially when I first started teaching, I definitely like the material that I started out good at, I was a great teacher for. And the material that I didn't understand as well, it make me nervous, right? Because you start
Mhm.
teaching and then you recognize, oh shoot, hold on, I need to make sure that I say this properly, right? I know it, but I'm not as comfortable explaining it. Now, years later, right? I've been teaching this content for a good amount of time now. Now I think I'm actually a much better instructor in the stuff that I really truly did not understand at the beginning, right? There's something to be said for having recognized I don't know this as well as I thought I did, and then rather than just again sitting with that and saying I'm never going to learn this, electrostatics is always going to be a mystery to me, saying no, you know what? I now recognize that I don't know this as well as I need to. I'm going to go in and investigate, right?
Mhm.
I'm going to go in and chase down those things I didn't understand and find a way to cement it in my brain, right? And that is not memorization. It's
Mhm.
not memorization, right? That's
Mhm.
not how that works. If you don't understand something, memorizing a fact is not going to help you get a question right on the exam, right? You need to be open to accepting you don't understand something, and then you need to go chase that content down, chase that material down, and get to a point where, again, you could simplify it to another person. And at the point that you can do that, you're never going to forget because the
Right.
process of investigating is so active, right? And again, it could be uncomfortable, but it's about as valuable as it can be in terms of actual learning with respect to time. Um, and that's how you really truly understand stuff is
Mhm.
intentional investigation, and explaining it in simple terms.
Mhm.
Honestly, I think a big part of why I was able to succeed on this exam was at the time I was studying, I was actually teaching medical biology at a academy for very gifted children. I was teaching medical biology to sixth, seventh, and eighth graders. So I was studying the Krebs cycle, for example, and I'm like, oh gosh, there's so much I need to know. I need to make sure I remember this. And then the next day, I have to teach Krebs cycle to a sixth grader. Like, I barely, I was struggling to understand this. How am I going to get a sixth grader to understand this? Right. But sometimes that's what you need is
Mhm.
how am I going to explain this to somebody who doesn't understand? Think of mnemonics, think of stories that will help it make sense. And guess what? Now it makes sense to you and you'll never, ever forget it.
Mhm.
So I love studying actively and trying to explain something in simple terms to somebody else is just about as valuable as your study method could be.
Yeah. I think another one of the big things, like if someone at home is like listening, right? What if they're thinking, I don't have anybody, I don't have a sixth grader to teach this to. I don't have somebody to
Mhm.
teach this to. Like, what can I do? I remember like I remember sitting down while I was like studying and for like the deviations to ideal gas law, we have the ideal gas law, but there are assumptions to the ideal gas law. I remember I was like, man, I'm just not wrapping my head around that, weird equation that you don't have to memorize, but you should understand. Why can't I get it? And so I pretended I was just standing in front of a lecture hall, that I was teaching it to a class. Like I stood in front of a mirror, and then I thought, what questions would somebody ask me if I were trying to teach this, right? And so it's just like that simulation, the thought of like, okay, what if I was teaching this? How would I want to word it? Where's the gap? Because I think something you said that was really important is targeting whatever like you're lacking in the content area. A big thing in tutoring and that I see is a review, right? And when we review, I notice when someone gets an electrochemistry question wrong or an acid base or any content error, they just said, need to review acid bases, right? And I'm like,
Mhm.
oh my God, no, we've got to get targeted. What was this question asking about? We have got to look for like that specific thing. Was it about PK? Okay, what about PK was it? Was it about what PK really is? Was it about how to calculate it? Don't just, we kind of generalize in these content areas. And let's get more targeted. And if you're trying to find out where that target, like how do I figure out what to target? Like we're talking about, trying to teach it to somebody else, to pretend like you're teaching it. Ask yourself questions about it, or also doing practice problems and like getting really, really focused in that review are just ways to, again, engage with the material rather than reading it from a textbook and just like memorizing all those terms.
Yeah. And just as a quick plug for a totally free resource that we offer, if you are trying to figure out what you need to spend more time on, we do have a content exclusive diagnostic that's on our website, right? Like you were saying, get more narrow. You missed an acid-base question. That doesn't mean that you necessarily need to go in and watch a 3-hour lecture on acids and bases, right? It could be specific to pKa, or it could actually be that you understood the material, but you didn't understand the question, or you didn't understand a figure that was in the passage, right? You could get a question wrong and say, shoot, I don't know the content, but really it might have been something else going on. It could have just been that you were exhausted. This was in an exam, right? And you had just, let's say this was in biochem. Maybe cars was really exhausting for you. Maybe you just didn't have the brain power, right? If you need to figure out how to create your content plan, the very best thing that you can do is to look at content alone and take away all of these variables that might be swaying where you're scoring, right? Because that pKa question, maybe you would have gotten it right if conditions were different or if the question was phrased differently. So this diagnostic we have on our website, the whole goal, no passages, not a ton of strategy, right? It's basically just a bunch of content-based multiple choice questions that help you get a bird's eye on like, okay, this is how I'm doing in electrostatics. This is how I'm doing in amino acids or enzyme kinetics, right? You can take that with the data in the analytics page and say, okay, let me expand biochem. Oh, shoot. Maybe I'm doing well in biochem overall, but actually glycolysis, I'm doing much worse on than some of these other areas in biochem, right? I think part of the stress of the MCAT is like, I know I'm not doing well, but I don't know how to spend my time and I don't know how to get better. That's something that I suggest to students all the time. Again, it's totally free, totally open access for you guys to use and kind of help gauge your understanding. I highly encourage you guys to do that if you're trying to figure out what content do I need to focus on, right? And then once you have that, again, try and teach it, try and simplify it, try and truly understand it versus just memorize it. And then take another test and see if you improve, right? Or notice that you will improve, right? And ultimately, once you do have that true understanding of these topics that you as an individual learner really need to learn, right? The only other thing that you really need to do is make sure that you don't forget it, right? So once you've, fought tooth and nail for that deep, genuine understanding, right? The next thing you need to do is retain. The reality is a lot of students, like you mentioned, Michael, sometimes spend 6 months to a year, even 2 years preparing for this. You're not going to have a perfect memory for everything you've learned over the past, couple months or a year or more. You need to make sure you are actively recalling that information all the time so that that information and that understanding you fought for doesn't go anywhere, right? That kind of brings us to our fourth thing we need to know, right? How can we retain information effectively so we don't have to keep learning and relearning the same material over and over again?
I think this was one thing that I think is one of the best materials, but also the most misused material, in my opinion, which is like the use of like flashcards, right? I think that's one of the biggest things. Like when it comes to retaining, it's probably the first thing that came on most people's mind is, well, just use Anki, I'll just use flashcards, I'll just do whatever resource. And while yes, 1,000% asterisk, right? Because there's a right way to do it, and there's a definite wrong way to do it. And I've again working with so many students, so many times I see, individuals using Anki cards ineffectively, which is only causing more frustration, more confusion. And then while it's a great resource, we're not getting the full potential out of it.
Hmm. I feel like we could have an entire episode on that, and maybe we need to.
Hmm.
Again, that was one of the things that when we first met and started talking, Mike and I talked about for a long time, because it is such a powerful tool, but when used in certain ways, it just becomes ineffective, right?
Hmm.
And it's like we know Ebbinghaus's forgetting curve. We've learned it in Psych Soc. We understand that if we don't interact with things that we've learned, that material is going to decay, right? Or that those neural pathways are ultimately going to decay. And we hear, right, Anki is this, Anki or spaced repetition algorithms, which is really what Anki is. This spaced repetition is, right, like neurologically focused. Like there's a point to it and it's scientifically backed. People hear that and they're like, cool, if I just download an Anki deck from the internet, and just, again, take the number of cards in the deck, divide it by the number of days, set 100 new cards a day, I'll be fine because science says spaced repetition is great. And it's like, yes, but no, right?
Hmm.
You need to use it in a way that's valuable for you, which unfortunately for some of us, right? You might not like this, but it means making your own cards. And it
Hmm.
means actually studying things that are valuable to you because taking someone else's words or, a fill in the blank card and just trying to shove it into your brain is going to waste a lot of time, right? Do fewer cards. Do not try and make your deck comprehensive. You don't need it. Make one specifically targeted to what you as an individual need to learn, right? And basically just take that understanding you've built and write it on a card. Put a question on it that will prompt you to remember this information, and you're golden, right? There's a lot of specifics that we could get into on how to make a good card, how to really get the most out of spaced repetition. But to me, at its most base level, it's just study cards that are meaningful to you and that help you retain and recall information that you specifically need to learn and remember, right?
Hmm. I think for like anyone listening, right, a real like great red flag to know, like, am I using my cards right? Are they saying these things? Am I one of those people using it wrong? If you find yourself like you see a card and before you've even read the whole card, you already know what the
Yes.
answer is, like red flag, like that's probably the main red flag. Because now, Molly, you said something really important, which is the Ebbinghaus curve is for interacting with the information. It's not
Hmm.
simply for just like, oh, I know this says what if, I know it's going to be glycolysis, right? It's okay, I engaged with this material. That caused me to reset. And so a great way to assess is if you're doing that. And I know I'm calling somebody out. And again, this is calling myself out. Like this is, 2019 Mike, right? When he was using flashcards in that way and was realizing, wow, why am I still forgetting things even though I'm using spaced repetition? It's because I wasn't using it properly. Right. And like making, and again, there's so much to be said for like making your own cards, but then also like, again, developing your deck, right?
Yes.
There's gonna be some points where I think, and again, Molly, I would love to, dive in on this, but like there's gonna be some things that you've reviewed it so many times, you've kind of maintained the Ebbinghaus curve enough where you can start getting rid of cards from your deck after a while. Because I know it's so stressful. Like when you come home and you have 5,000 cards you have to get through. Right?
Oh my
Like
God.
it's because we keep on adding cards. Like I know, right? Like a little heart palpitations
Yeah.
because we just keep on adding things, but then and we keep on doing them, but we don't just we can't we fail to like self-assess sometimes. Like, okay, there's some of these cards that, right, I know these are all the enzymes of the Krebs cycle, and I've reviewed it well times. And not to say to get rid of these cards, but like now I don't need to see these cards every single week. Maybe it's every 2, 3, maybe it's every 3 weeks. That's the whole idea of the Ebbinghaus curve, where the time between review gets longer and longer and longer. And we know, like, again, as long as you've spaced them out accordingly, you don't need to see them as often. But I see so many people like they just review the same cards, but then keep on adding new. And then now I had a free trial session the other week, and I had a student say like, yeah, after this I have 5,000 Anki cards to do, and I was like, oh my goodness, that's so stressful. So these are some of the red flags to think of like, okay, if that's me, maybe we need to start self like reassessing how we're using our cards.
I love that. Yeah. Oh my gosh. You said 5,000 cards, and immediately, even as someone who teaches the MCAT and has for a long time, oh my gosh, my blood pressure spiked. That was some sympathetic nervous system activation immediately. Personally, I'm a big fan of putting a ton of or not a ton, but putting more information on the back and keeping the front very simple, right? Very simple, right? Explain the photoelectric effect. If you don't know what the photoelectric effect is, you get no help from the front of that card at all, right? The back is going to have everything that I realized I needed to know, right? I'm going to sit down with a whiteboard, explain the photoelectric effect. It might take me 2-3 minutes, but I'm going to write down every single thing that I can think of that I know about the photoelectric effect. I'm going to take a look at the back and say, ooh, wait, this little thing, I forgot. I didn't write that down, right? I have feedback on, okay, I knew most of it. I'm getting better, but there are things that I'm still forgetting, right? That's much more useful than blank equals this. Your brain, is a wonderful and fascinating organ, but it's going to start to fill in the blanks for you, right? Just through the sheer power of recognition, right? Recognition is not understanding. It's not recall. And you're going to find out pretty quickly that recognition does not translate to success, right? And ultimately, we have a lot more to talk about flashcards. We'll probably talk about this in a full episode to give us time to fully dive in and, let's be honest, rant a little bit about Anki and spaced repetition. Which, by the way, if you don't like the format of Anki and how bad or how troublesome, I guess, challenging the UI is, we do have a free version on our website that syncs across your devices. It's maybe a little bit more beginner friendly than Anki might be. But right, stay tuned for that flashcard episode in the future, you guys. This discussion really brings us to our fifth and final thing for today, at least, that you guys need to know, which is prioritize practice, right? You will recognize very quickly if you don't know something to the depth of the MCAT when you do MCAT questions, right? As we mentioned all the way back at the beginning of the episode, right? You will go through these different phases of your studying. You'll have a primarily content phase, you'll have a primarily passage practice phase, and you'll have an exam phase. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't be doing passages constantly, right? As we've talked about, we should be doing cars all the way through, but we should do this in science too, right? This needs to be something we do all the time to constantly evaluate, do I know the material at an MCAT level? And for stuff that I've learned in the past, do I remember enough about it to continue to succeed on these questions? So we need to be doing both and really merge both all throughout our studying to make sure that we are constantly engaging with all types of information for this exam.
I have to definitely say, like, I agree with every point. The practice one is by far the most important, in my opinion.
Yes.
I mean, I always say this, whoever does the most practice questions, assuming you review it and understand it, does better, period. It's just like, you'll go on Reddit, you'll go on these like forums, and people will go, oh, I got a 520, I got a 521, or, a crazy score, right? And you're probably thinking, oh, it's because they're really smart. And yeah, of course they're smart. But what you notice in those posts is I did 6 practice exams. I did the Jack Westin Q Bank, all the dailies. I did, this and that. And ultimately, then the sheer volume of questions you do equates to a higher score. Again, assuming you're actually learning the material when you review it, because there's no other way, there's no better way to learn. Questions are active memory, understanding, pointing out weaknesses. You're going to spend more time on the topics you're weaker on because you're weak on it when you do a question, right? Versus just reading a book. I think most people start reading books because they like the things they read, right? Usually you gravitate towards the things you understand, right? And so practice questions really are a way for you to figure out, okay, here's where I'm really not good at it, and what I need to work on it, right? And by the way, doing practice questions are hard. Like, I get this question all the time. Wait, how many questions should I do? Is it normal to not do so many in the beginning, yeah, like start with 10, start with 5. It's more important to get into the rhythm of doing questions and accepting that and learning from your mistakes than avoiding it until the very end. I find that students who wait and do questions the last month and only the last month end up retaking. That's like 50% of students. So
Yeah.
don't be in that category, please.
Yeah, I do a lot of like the how to study, like free trial sessions. I
Mhm.
recommend people stop by, but during those sessions, especially the last one, I got a question like, when should I start doing passages? Like we talk about these different seasons, right? Where there's the content season, passage season, sure, the exam season, but okay, when's the transition? Well, there's a lot of overlap between them. Right, during the content phase, you should be doing passages. Sure, it's not, again, you are again focusing on that content, but not to say that, oh, just because that's not the main, this is not the main season for that, that's not to do the passages. And I think I can speak to my own scenario. I think for my own exam, I think I did about 11 or 12 practice exams before my real deal exam. And I remember one of the biggest things and one of the most useful things that I learned was taking this exam, like we've like reiterated 100 times probably at this point, is not just about the content. It's about the strategy. It's about the application. It's also about the mindset. We want you to go into this exam like confident that you can succeed on it. And a lot of times we fear the things we don't know. I've met a lot of people that have like taken 2, 3 practice exams before the real deal exam. And the exam at that point is still such a frightening thing. It's still such a mystery because you haven't experienced it many times. You haven't had the chance to see different types of questions, to see different types of cars passages in an exam scenario. And so that's why we are so big on practice exams. And it's part of the reason why, like when I was going through this, exams are expensive. Like I remember, like I took 11 exams. I took the AMC ones, and I took a third party one. But I had to purchase all of those. Again, I was an undergrad student, a very broke undergrad student, and that was one of the things where that was a real burden, and it's one of the reasons why. And I mean, Jack, I would love to ask you about like what the reasoning behind why we wanted to offer completely free practice exams on our website. One of the things that I don't think anybody else is doing.
This is why we exist, right?
Mhm.
Is because we want to help as many people as we can become doctors. It's already hard to take these pre-med classes. Why burden students by making them pay thousands of dollars for what I believe should be their right to study, right? Like that's really why we exist. Yes, we have premium resources. And those are because that requires our time. Like we literally sit there and teach, right? Hour by hour. And so that requires us to charge a fee. But ultimately, things that we produce one time, I don't like the idea of making people buy it over and over again every 6 months, right? And period. Like they shouldn't buy practice questions. Like that's something we make one time and we can release that to everyone and everyone can benefit from it. It, in my opinion, is a better way of doing business. It's helping everyone out. And those who really need more guidance, more support can get it. They can sign up for one of our courses, one of our tutoring programs, and whatnot. So that's our philosophy. We don't like being predatory. We don't like nickeling and diming our students. We've been based off 3 pillars since we began, right? And this is why I decided to go down this route of test prep, is because I believe that this didn't exist. One is amazing content, amazing quality content. That was very rare back then, and it still is very rare today. It's not easy to make amazing teaching content today, right? And so that's one of our big pillars, is anything we produce has to be the best resource out there, right? So that I can truly say that with our passages. I can truly say that with our videos, with our courses, with our Chrome extension, our tutor advanced solutions, which we can go into. These are all free. Most of these are free. Second would be support. You know, what good is great content if you don't have someone guiding you, supporting you, nurturing you throughout this process? It really does take a village to help someone get into med school. And typically that village could be your family, your friends. But what if you don't have that kind of role model? What if you don't have any assistance in that regard? We want to be there for you. We want to be that big brother, that big sister that you can go to for guidance, right? And then third, this is again one of the reasons why we're doing this, is accessibility. Being on the internet, being online, making sure our resources are freely available to as many people as possible. those three pillars will never change. I promise you that, right? We will always be more accessible, always produce great content, and support our students every single step of the way.
I love that. Jack, you've just so eloquently and beautifully organized exactly my why of why I'm here, right? Like I so believe in this mission of increasing access to really high quality materials, right? I mean, for the MCAT specifically, of course, but just in general, right? So many individuals are so worthy of becoming a physician if you're willing to put in the time and the hours that it takes to go all the way to do medical school residency, if you're willing to make the financial investment in medical school itself, right? Like it's such a big ask to pursue medicine, and your bank account should not be what allows you to pursue that or not, right? We really do need as a society open access to education and information. And the fact that we're able to do that with so many of our resources means that ultimately the next future generation of doctors is not only just going to be better educated and have a much more, comprehensive, solid understanding of the material, but that it will also be a new population that reflects the amazing diversity that we see all around the world with all these different communities that now have access to these resources because they've been open access. So I love that. Thank you for the work that you've been facilitating all throughout this, your years teaching the MCAT, and really helping us increase representation in medicine. And again, helping prepare our students to be not just the most educated, but the most holistically prepared group of future doctors that we have. I know as a society, we'll all benefit from that. Obviously, physicians play such a key role in our society. So I love that. Thank you for sharing essentially why I'm here. I'm sure, Mike, that hits home for you too.
Yeah, I think, the mission that that's why we gravitated here to JW. I think you and I, Molly, it's because of how open it is, the resources. I do completely free trial sessions, open to anyone in the public and in the comments, right? So many people are like, "Oh my goodness, I can't believe this is free." But this is why we want to set the new precedent where we want to kind of bring down the barriers to medicine because there are so many barriers to medicine for a field that, frankly, we're lacking physicians nowadays. And yet, the fact that these barriers still apply to many individuals, I think that is one of our main missions, and I couldn't agree more. But not also that it's accessible, but it's quality, right?
Yeah.
That's one of the biggest things. One of my big whys is I don't just want to teach, I want to teach well. I want to teach the skills and in the way that I want my future physician to have learned, to have taught, right? It's skills to learn, how to learn, how to look at this information, not just from a textbook, but from an idea where you want to learn this information, where this is information that is not only interesting, but that you can use this information for the betterment of everybody else. And so that quality, that accessibility is, I think, why, that's my big why, and also why we're here, why we're doing this currently.
Yeah. And it's not just why we're here, why we're putting out all these resources. It's actually why we're also here today in this podcast, right? The whole goal of this podcast is to help, again, concentrate the lessons that we've all learned over the past X amount of years. I won't out ourselves and how many years we've been working in this, but it's a lot, right? The whole goal of this is to help get you guys those tips and tricks that you need to, again, not just be a successful MCAT student, but a successful, well-rounded medical student, resident, and then physician in the future, and even just as an individual. So we're going to be back again this week, next week, and every other week, right? To come to you guys with this distilled knowledge. We want to see you guys succeed. Next week, in fact, we're going to be talking not just about how to structure a study plan and what the different phases are, how to integrate CARs and practice material. We're going to be really dissecting what the MCAT mindset should be if we are going to open ourselves up to our, fullest success on this test. We'll also be sharing some tips and tricks for exam day. So if you have an exam coming up, make sure to tune in next week. If you don't, tune in anyways, right? You'll be extra prepared when this does roll around. And again, we want to frame you guys in the mindset that's going to really encourage the most growth to set you guys up for the score of your dreams, right? Which is why we're ultimately all here. So if you guys found this helpful, definitely come back again next week. It's been such a pleasure talking, not just to you guys, our audience, but also with Mike and Jack. What a fun episode. Thank you guys for being here. This was awesome.